Thank you. You mentioned a word earlier, rejectionism. How do we deal with Israeli rejectionism in the West Bank, where there's an ever-increasing number of settlements? I think 2024 had the highest number of land grabs, 24,000 dunams were declared as state land, sorry. How do we deal with that? So Israel doesn't want to see the West Bank go under Palestinian sovereignty. What are your views?
I think at various times in its history and in the history of the conflict, Israel has, according to reports from people like Bill Clinton and even Israeli prime ministers who've recently shown maps and the like, has proposed very favourable settlements to the issues of those disputed territories. I think that right now, after the atrocities of October the 7th, much of the, let's say, traditionally left peace camp in Israel has really been massively disillusioned by what happened from its Palestinian neighbours.
Does that justify violent settlers?
I'm not trying to justify anything. I'm not here to defend or anything. I'm just giving you my analysis in answer to your question of what I make of the current situation. So I think that the opinion of many Israeli citizens, and not all, they're certainly not a homogenous group, it's a thriving democracy, but the opinion of much of Israeli society has changed drastically over the last 18 months since that horrific attack. And I think that many who were of the tendency to try to give land in return for peace have found themselves disillusioned again and again over time. And so I suspect that the prospect of trying to convince Israeli people, as well as many Israeli politicians, that land concessions will stop the continued threat, which is very manifest, as we saw on October the 7th and before and after it, I think that it will be very difficult to convince them of that. So what I would suggest is that if that is one's aim and agenda, especially as allied countries, for example, the UK, it would be a really good idea and a strong idea to try to convince Israel. We often talk about confidence building in the actions that states take towards the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinian Arabs. I think that often that confidence building has not been enough on the side of building the confidence of the Israelis, who have a very obvious fear of the brutality of those neighbours it's expected to negotiate with and make peace with. And so if we can give in any way, diplomatically or politically, some sort of support to our democratic ally in Israel, that they are going to be able to ensure their security, that is more likely, I think.
In terms of settlement expansions then, do you think that they should come to an end, or do you think that they should carry on as they are?
Well, I think the issues of the disputed territories in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, it's a live issue that has always been part of the negotiations when they've been able to take place between the two sides. I think that there are obviously many good arguments for them to stop. I think there are many good arguments as well in part of negotiations that have been tried and tested by both sides, and they've always been rejected by the Palestinians in negotiations ultimately. In fact, it was Bill Clinton who recently said that in a public address, that the option offered by him 25 years ago was so favourable that it's extraordinary that anyone should think it should remain today after the complete rejection of it.
Thank you. Do you think our government should do more to prevent the expansion of settlements?
I think our government should very much focus on the cause that might be behind Israeli actions, as I said, which is to build confidence on their part that their security won't be overlooked. So a lot of the issue to do with the territories in the West Bank...
So if there's
I'll tell you. A lot of the issues to do with territory in that region is to do with security and safety. So obviously Israel is a very tiny country, and at its minimum waste there, should there be, let's say, a surrender of all of those disputed territories, it would mean that the kind of attack that we saw take place, the brutal Palestinian terrorist attack from Gaza that we saw take place on October the 7th, could actually take place on Israel's major cities in central Israel as well, from those putative Palestinian territories. And that is, I think, one of the reasons why the popularity of negotiating over those territories and Israel giving them away is one that has really waned in popularity in Israeli society, because there is a very justifiable fear that should those pieces of land be given over to people who have still not de-radicalized or decided to stop waging an exterminative war on the State of Israel, there is an increased danger there.
Is your view everybody who lives in the West Bank, Palestinians that live there, potentially at risk of radicalisation and that can never sort of...
Well, I know that you've had written evidence from Impact SE about the Palestinian educational curriculum. So I know that you'll be familiar, if you've read that, with the incitement and the sorts of claims that are taught to children from a very young age. Indeed, Palestinian television broadcasts as well, whether it's been the sermons from Fatah mosques in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, or whether
We've done better
Gaza.
than that. Nearly everybody on this committee has had the benefit of being able to visit the area, the disputed area, as you call it, and be able to meet people and to talk to them and to work out for ourselves whether or not they have been radicalised or can potentially be radicalised. And I think that's, it's important, of course, for parliamentarians to visit the area so that they can reach their own conclusions on that matter.
Yes, and I also have visited those regions and met many people there as well myself. And I would say that, if you're asking me, are there any people who identify as Palestinian in that area who are committed to peaceful coexistence, who are not radicalised? Well, of course there are. I think that the challenge for those people is that they're very often treated by their own leadership and their own mainstream political parties in a very deeply problematic way that means that they're not really able to pursue that agenda, if that is their agenda, because there is so much pushing them and their children and future generations towards a continuation of a sort of narrative of infinite and never-ending resistance, which ultimately means resistance to the existence of the State of Israel all too often. And I think
is it
that
not
is
also
part of the problem.
There's no hope.
But there's been hope many times.
But at the moment, and for the past few decades, if you were a Palestinian living on the West Bank or in East Jerusalem or in Gaza, you would think there was no hope. There was no possibility of you being able to have equal rights with Israelis or to have your own state. And that is the day-to-day existence of Palestinians. There's certainly those that we have met.
Well, I agree with you that if there are Palestinians who you've met and who I've met who are committed to peaceful coexistence with Israelis and foresee a situation in the future where the conflict is ended and they can coexist side by side with a Jewish Israeli state, then it's absolutely a massive tragedy that they haven't got political leadership which has managed to manifest that with the State of Israel, which has made peace with other Arab neighbours, which has made accords with other Arab countries in order to prove and just to benefit from the result of those accords and agreements. There is definitely within the Israeli population's desires the desire for all this to end. But I think that anybody that saw what happened on October the 7th can be very clear that the fantasy that tomorrow one can simply declare statehood of a people that literally invaded, raped, murdered and tortured, including civilians from Gaza, we all saw them. I think it is a fantasy at this stage, or at least in the eyes of many Israelis I speak to, both on the street and in politics, even those who dislike passionately this government and this Prime Minister in Israel. They still feel that fantasy is much, much further away. And I agree that creating hope on both sides is really the key to moving things forwards. But I would say that what has dashed hope, what has ruined hope, what has abandoned hope, what has killed hope for Israelis and for any Palestinians you've just described is the actions of those Palestinian terrorists who've said they would do it again and again and who are proving it, backed up by a jihadi, tyrannical, theocratic regime in the Islamic Republic of Iran who are still engaging in those activities, not just against Israel, but against this country. They kidnapped our sailors. They kidnapped Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe. They are attacking international trade. And this is a problem that all of the world, all of the West needs to unite behind. It's not just an issue anymore about Israel and Jews.